We are creatures of desire. What we most desire is meaning. What makes us suffer most is a lack of meaning.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Marital therapist, author, and communications trainer Andrew G. Marshall invites guests from all walks of life to discuss what makes life meaningful.
Hello, I'm Andrew G. Marshall. Welcome to The Meaningful Life. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and wherever you find your podcasts. Do you find yourself with nothing to say to someone you love? And the silence is not that beautiful space where you both open up to something deeper, but an echoing emptiness. Perhaps you avoid these moments with loops of news sharing and chat about friends and family or watching a film together. What would it be like instead to break the silence with a genuinely intimate conversation and a deeper connection? That's the project that my witness today has been working on for over 10 years. It started with an interactive TV documentary, which won an Emmy, called The And has now become a book. Topaz Adizes is a director, an entrepreneur, and the author of 12 Questions for Love, a guide to intimate conversations and deeper relationships. I have this picture of you, Topaz, being a child that asked their parents lots of awkward questions. Am I right?
Probably. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I was always inquisitive and I always had a great deal of curiosity. Why is this working like this? Why like that? And I find that my son now, who's 4, might be very similar because he's always asking me, what for? What for? What is this for? What is that for?
And are you able to answer him?
No, not always. What I find myself answering is that's what it's designed for, or that's how it's designed. And I find myself paying a lot more attention to the design of things because that's how I answer my son. I said, that's why it's designed. That's how it's designed. And what I find interesting is that he's now starting to ask why, but he initially started asking what for. And I think that's a really powerful distinction. There's one thing about why, but there's also what for, which suggests the purpose. How is it serving something else? I think that's a beautiful question. What for instead of why?
And I think that what we're saying today and why I was interested in talking to you is that questions can actually really deepen your relationship. And people find, and this is my experience of working with couples, people find it quite difficult to ask curious questions. Why do you think that is?
Because you are good at what you practice. And I don't think we practice asking quality questions. And that is because there's a lot of power in questions. Because questions can shape your experience of living, quite frankly. And why I say that is because when you wake up in the morning and the first thought comes to your mind about whatever you have to do today, you're not realizing that that thought is actually an answer to a question. And in our society, we are so focused on answers that we are often focusing more on the answer than realizing the power lies in the question that's being asked, because the question shapes the answer. And that's where the power lies. It's in the shaping of the possibilities. And if you change the question, you change the possibilities.
So tell us about this project, The And, so people understand how it works.
So yeah, now we're in our 11th year. We have been inviting people who are in some kind of relationship, family, friends, couples, lovers, and they sit down facing one another. And we present them with questions that they ask one another. And we film it with 3 cameras, 2 close-ups, and 1 wide shot. And then we present that always either in a triptych or bi-panel form. And what we're saying is, it's about the space between. We're illuminating the space between. We're illuminating the connection. And that's why it's called The And. Because a relationship is not you or I, us or them. It's you and I, us and them. It's the and that connects us. It's the and that is the space between. And the impetus here is to illuminate the space between, to illuminate the threads of connection that exist between 2 people. And you can do that when you are always showing a bi-panel format or triptych, where you're always seeing both people listening and responding to one another, which is actually quite rare. Because if you think about all the content you watch, you're always, any film or social media, what you're seeing is the people speaking. You're not seeing the person also listening at the same time. And that's quite a unique experience in this unique space that we've created, in that people are sharing of themselves. And it's not necessarily what they're saying, it's how they're connecting. And if you witness our content, that is what you'll see and feel. And the fact that we've been doing it for 10 years, over 1,200 conversations, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about how to have these cathartic, powerful, profound conversations that deepen one's connection with another person.
So how did you start on this journey?
I was a filmmaker for many years. I studied philosophy. I studied philosophy at Oxford and Berkeley in the States. And I was always interested in inquiry and questioning. And I went into filmmaking, and I realized that the camera was a door opener. It was a bridge into other people's worlds. You know, you show up into someone's life and you have a camera there and you're making a film. They're more likely to let you in. You know, obviously you have to create a rapport and a relationship, but that lets you in. And after doing that for some time, and then realizing how digital media was transforming the landscape of media, but also of connection and communication, I was really drawn to that. And so I launched the Skin Deep, which is an experience design studio, with the fundamental question of asking, how is the experience, the emotional experience of being human, shifting in these times? Because
wow,
that was, you know, throughout my life, it's been questions. You said, like, I always ask my parents, you know, interesting, wacky questions. I've always asked questions of myself. And I didn't realize the power of that until I wrote this book and distilled down, how did this come about? How was it that my team and I have kind of been placed in this position of this incredibly powerful format that creates deep listening and empathy. And it's really that I find myself asking myself questions that then leads to action. So when I launched the Skin Deep, it was, how is the experience of all this digital technology that we're using now? This is 2014 when we began. How is it affecting the way that we're dating? How is it affecting the way that we're communicating? How is it affecting the way we identify ourselves and we express ourselves? Because it is an incredible change that's happening. And that's something that I've been really interested in. So the Skin Deep, the experience design studio, we create experiences that explore that. We've created the Yan, which is the most successful, but we've also had a number of others like, you know, the Window and the Dig, and that have also won awards and created interesting conversations and exploration.
And have you got any answers yet?
Well, I think the answers, one of the answers is distilled in the book, 12 Questions for Love. Like, how do we create the space for us to have intimate conversations? And isn't it interesting that the more intimate you are with someone, oftentimes we take the most for granted. We don't actually explore that relationship because of our desire to be safe, right? So this is the person I know best. I see them all the time, and I'm going to put them in a box, and we're not actually, I'm going to keep this safe so that therefore it's comfortable. But we confound safety and comfort. You can be safe and uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, it's a great place to be. And why is that? Because if you look at your life, in my opinion, when you look at everything that is an achievement or something that you feel really proud of that you've done, it's usually preceded by a challenge, by discomfort. And so when we lean into discomfort, that's where growth exists. So how do you do that? The best place to do that, in my opinion, is in a safe place, but that is also uncomfortable. And let's not confuse the two.
So in a moment, we're going to start looking at how we're going to frame a conversation. But before we do that, I think I'm going to ask you a really fundamental question, and that is, what makes a good question?
Well, I've broken it down to 5 pieces in the book in the scope, in a context of a relationship. What makes a well-constructed question? And there's 5 parts. One is in terms of having a conversation in your relationship where you are exploring your connection, where you are exploring how you are living together, how you're reflecting one another, how are you interacting, what are these emotions that you're going through. Those are the kind of conversations that I'm inviting people to have, because that illuminates the experience of being alive. That illuminates your own reflection of living in the eyes of the other who's seeing you, because they can see things that you can't see, your blind spots and such. And in that sharing, it illuminates your experience of being alive. It amplifies your experience of living. And so oftentimes with the people closest to us, we don't explore that. But if we create well-constructed questions, we can. So one of them is, let's not ask a binary question. If you begin a question with the word do, is, are, would, should, you begin a question with any of those words, you are inviting the answer to be either or, yes, no, this, that. And where do you go from that?
And I would say, don't go into the question trying to get out an answer that you know is going to come. So, you're not trying to get a confession or am I right in thinking? They've got to be a genuinely curious question.
That's another aspect which I say, don't have a question with an agenda, Because the point here is we want the hearts to connect, not the minds to protect. And oftentimes, if there's an agenda and you feel that, what's engaging is your mind, because your mind is there to protect. It's like we're having a chess match here. So you asking me a question, and then I'm coming out to protect myself and not really to engage. And what I'm offering people is here, how do we create the space and then put in well-constructed questions that invite the hearts to connect? And so there's two parts, well-constructed questions, which you're asking, but also creating the space. In a well-constructed question, if there's an agenda to your question, you're not inviting the heart out. And what is the difference between an agenda and an intention? Because when I say creating the space, it's articulating an intention. And here I'm making a distinction, and a good question is do not have an agenda. The difference is an intention is where you begin. An agenda is where you end up. So if you have the intention of, hey, I want to have a conversation here about this conflict we had, or this or that, or why, okay, that's your intention, but you don't know where you're ending up. An agenda would be, I know where we're ending up, which is I want your apology. I want you to say you're sorry. I want you to change your action. And that's where I want to get to. When a person feels that you have an agenda, which is you already taking them somewhere with maybe they don't want to go, they're not there open and exploring. They're protecting themselves. So articulating the intention creates the space for you to be exploring a conversation, which is helpful. And then when you construct a question, don't do it with that one that has a clear agenda, because that's not an invitation. The invitation is one with intention.
So what else do we need for a well-framed question?
The third one would be an excellent one, which people often miss, is make the question connective. And what do I mean by connective? Make the question such that it reflects the people who are in conversation. Simple example. If I ask you, Andrew, what scares you the most? And your husband asks you, Andrew, what scares you the most? And a stranger says, hey, Andrew, what scares you the most? 3 different people ask you the same question, you're going to give the same answer. That question does not acknowledge the person you're in conversation with. So instead, if I made it connective and I said, Andrew, what do you think scares both of us the most? See, now the question, what do you think scares both of us the most, acknowledges the person asking it. And therefore, your answer will be different when I ask it, when your husband asks it, and a stranger asks it. See? So you're shaping the question to acknowledge the person asking or the people in conversation. That is a really helpful tool to make the conversation more unique to the people who are involved. And the people who are listening and waiting for the answer are more invested because they're involved. They know that their presence in making the answer special and unique to this moment, to their connection with you.
So give us another example of a connective type of question.
Another one would be, what do you think about love? What do you think about relationships? What is the most important thing in your life right now? All those you can talk about, and whoever's asking you or whoever's asking is not being acknowledged. If instead we said, how do you think we both see love similarly and differently? How do you think we both see love? What do you think we both find really important about the experience of living? Right? I'm incorporating the person asking. So those questions, what they're asking you is not how you're experiencing life on your own. They're asking you to illuminate the connection or reflection that you have with the person you're in relationship in that conversation. And I think that's a powerful tool of acknowledgement and also of showing what is unique in your connection, because your connection with one person is different than someone else. With your father, with your sister is different than with your partner or with your best friend. And so why are we not asking questions that acknowledge that? And so by making them connective, you are.
So you said 5 elements. I think we're up to 3 now. So what are the last 2?
The last 2 is, one of them is bringing 2 disparate ideas together is always interesting. So how does conflict make us better? What does earning money cost you, Andrew?
Sleep at night sometimes, to be perfectly honest.
What is your favorite memory from your worst relationship?
I'm going to have a lot of trouble thinking about what my worst relationship was.
But do you see how you're not often thinking about your favorite memory in your worst relationship?
Yeah.
What is our favorite lie that we love telling ourselves in this relationship? That's a tough one. Or vice versa. What's the truth that we hate telling ourselves in this relationship?
What can't we talk about?
What can't we talk about and we love that we aren't? Because what that does is that creates the space where you now have to connect 2 disparate ideas that you haven't done before.
And I could see this conversation lasting at least 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. It could be even the whole evening.
I mean, we have people who ask 1, 2, 3 questions and they go all evening, and that's fine. And that's beautiful. And I think that goes to your very first question. How do we ask constructive questions that can create the space for exploration and connection in one's relationship that we often take for granted? And I think that's it, is creating the space and then asking well-constructed questions. But the flip side is, what's the payoff? Why do it?
Well, that's a very good question. Let me ask it. Why bother?
Because do you prefer watching not prefer, but the experience of watching a film in black and white is different than in color. The experience of having a relationship that is in muted conversation, that does not dig deep into the experience of your being, is different than one that does. The fear is uncomfortableness because you're vulnerable. The payoff is greater resilience and fulfillment.
And the question is, how brave are you most of the time? So I think if people...
But let me jump in there for a sec. It is how brave you are, but also how smart are you? Because if you're going to do something, then you want to do it feeling safe and knowing you're uncomfortable. If I'm going to jump off a cliff, I'm not going to do it without a bungee cord or a parachute. Because if I just jump without it, I'll fall and die. But if I do it with a bungee cord of someone who's trained or a parachute that someone who's trained and I'm trained, then I'll be uncomfortable, but I am safe. Right? In theory, I am safe. And that's a different experience. And that is one that I'm inviting people into. And that's what I think that here's a key. Well, not key, but here's one key. Where do we learn this? Where do we actually learn to have deeper conversations?
Well, I would think on podcasts like this, but you certainly don't learn it at school. And if you had parents that either fought all the time or avoided topics all the time, you're not going to learn at home either.
Right? My opinion is you learn it by modeling in your family. You learn the conversations, the way you communicate, by modeling in your family or in your friend group. And obviously listening to podcasts like this informs you the possibilities, but ultimately you need to practice it, because I can watch someone riding a bike all day long, but if I don't actually ride the bike, I'll never learn. So where do you actually learn it is by doing, and where are the guideposts for how to do it? And that's what the offering of the book is, at least I'm not a therapist. I'm not a trained therapist. What I am is a filmmaker with a great deal of curiosity who spent the last 10, now 11 years watching people have conversations.
So we've covered some of the things that makes for a good conversation. We've done framing and content, and I think this one is really important. You sort of need to have permission from the other person that you're going to have this conversation. I don't think you can just spring them on people. You have to set it up, or you have to get them agreeing to it. You can't sneak in a deep conversation 5 minutes before you drop off to sleep.
Absolutely. I think it's about what I call creating the space, right? It's that if your partner comes home one day and says, just out of the blue, why do you love me? You're not wondering why you love them. You're wondering, what's the context? Where is this coming from? So by articulating the intention, which is creating the space, you are then creating the space for permission to give and receive, to behave in a certain way. So if you pull out the book, hey, let's ask these 12 questions. Oh, the context is created. I know why we're asking these questions. Therefore, I know why we're having this conversation. Similarly, if your partner comes home and just tells you why they love you so much, you're not really there to receive these words of love and endearment because you're wondering, where's this coming from?
Or you might be watching the potatoes to check they don't boil over.
Exactly. And you're just, where's this coming from? What's happened that we haven't created this space? And the space of simply articulating the intention. Let's create a game where we ask each other questions. We have these 12 editions of questions that we sell, and you can just play that. That simply creates a space because you're playing a game and we're randomly asking these questions. And so then oh, why are they asking me this question? Because the question was randomly pulled out of the deck of cards and we're playing a game. Great. The space is created to give and receive, to go and say certain things that you wouldn't say otherwise. And that is what I mean by creating the space, is you're just articulating an intention.
So we've got a great question. We now need to also have something else that's equally important, and that's deep listening. From watching all these couples talk to each other, have you got any advice on how to listen in a deep kind of way?
So for me, deep listening comes from, what I mean by that is feeling to listen. Because again, this is an invitation for the heart to come out. What I mean by the heart is your emotions, is your full being, not the mind that's there to protect you. And oftentimes we are in conversations where our minds are thinking about the response. How do I respond so that I win this argument? How do I respond so that I sound intelligent? How do I respond so that I get what I want?
I don't get into trouble.
So I don't get into trouble. How do I get by? Okay. so that I can hide, fine. What I'm inviting people into is to have conversations with their hearts. What I mean by the hearts is their full body. What I mean by the hearts is your emotion. What I mean by the hearts is exploring what you are experiencing as a human being. And so deep listening is actually listening to the body, is listening to what comes up and not jumping at the first response that the mind is offering. Because I've seen this in numerous conversations. Mind you, I've sit through hours and hours and hours of people of all kinds in over 10 countries have conversations. And what I've noticed is that for many of us, you ask a question and we respond with our first thought. And that first thought might not necessarily be ours. It might be society's programming. I mean, how often do you have a conversation? How's the weather? Great. Or how you doing? Fine, sunny, this. That is a natural society icebreaker. But if we ask a different question, we can have a different conversation. We could drop into something else. I've seen this in blind dates on the And, where we had many blind dates come in and we had one question, which was, why do you think I'm still single? Right?
What sort of answers do you get?
Well, there was a consistent answer that came across. And this is where I first had this illumination that hit me. The answer was, well, you're still figuring yourself out before you go out and get in a relationship. You're figuring yourself out. I said, this is awkward because we had quite a variety of people from different backgrounds and experiences, and they all answered the same thing, 95%. I thought, well, is this really true? Or is this kind of this programming that we get through media, that we get through reading books? Like, this is an understanding that we're just saying because it's a cultural mantra. It's a societal programming. I'm figuring myself out. Oh, okay, maybe. And then I saw certain couples, when they're asked a question, the first thing they would do is just take a breath, would feel their body. If you watch Sidra and Ben, who are a couple that have been on about 8 times over the course of 10 years, which, by the way, is a beautiful thing. Our project is not just a whole breadth spectrum of experiences and relationships. It also has depth. We have couples that come back 6, 7, 8 times, and you see them growing and changing. Ben and Sidra is one such couple. And I see Ben, every time Sidra asks him a question, first, he does not respond until he has eye contact with his partner. He waits until she puts the card down, until she's present, and she's looking him right in the eye. And he takes a breath, and you can see him feeling his body. And he responds from that space. And when he does, there's just so much more inertia in the presence of the conversation. And so I invite people that when you're having these conversations, don't just jump at the first thought, because the first thought might not necessarily be your own. You know what I'm saying? It might be influenced by other things. So listen to your body. Ooh, interesting. Where's that tension bringing up? What vulnerability is that coming up? And sharing from that place invites you and brings you into a new kind of conversation. And that's where exploration is had. And that brings a lot more illumination to your experience of being alive because you're discovering new things.
So you've done this experience with your father. I think you've done it more than once? Twice,
yeah.
So what did you discover when you and your father got into this special space?
I discovered that my nose is a little crooked, deviated septum, and my dad's hard of hearing. That's what I discovered. No, I'm kidding. Because when I first watched it, I'm like, oh yeah, what did I discover? I really appreciate him, but I knew that before. I don't know if I discovered, but it reaffirmed for me that we have a really beautiful connection and bond. And I'm grateful for that. And I had another experience with a friend, Justin, which I discovered more, which, you know, we've been friends for 16 years. That's also in our library. You can see on YouTube. But after, you know, I did it last year with him. And that was a big surprise for me because even for me, who's witnessed so many, having the conversation with Justin is one that we didn't really have before. And it really reaffirmed our friendship, our love for one another. We spoke in ways that we don't normally speak in, and we explored things in different ways. And it was such a joy, such a pleasure. And I think with my father, I've had those conversations before. And with Justin, I hadn't. And so the And really created that space for him and I to connect in a new way. And that was profound for me. And even though I'd watched so many of the people do it, but even for me to experience it was wonderful. It was surprising.
And men don't actually ask each other questions. They sort of jockey for position, really, don't they? Often?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've noticed that pattern. I find that really interesting. Again, I just go back to the payoff is that you're living this experience as a human. You have people that share intimate parts of your life. And there's a fear in being vulnerable. There's a discomfort in being vulnerable. And I just think that the payoff is so much greater. And so how do we get from the fear that we have of being vulnerable to being vulnerable in a safe way, yet uncomfortable, that gives us such a great deal of the sensation, the fulfillment of being alive as a human being. And that's what I'm trying to offer people through what I've learned in the last 10 years.
So I've taken a couple of your questions and I thought I would sort of illuminate them more and talk about them.
Great.
So the first one I liked, and because I'm thinking very much for couples, when do you feel closest to me? What sort of surprising answers have you had?
What I love about that question is that it always brings a pause. And shortly after that pause, it's followed by a smile or a wink or a knowing between the pairs. And it's usually something small. It's usually something really humble and simple and basic. And I think that's beautiful. It's like the mortars and the brick of your relationship. Something that's always there, but that reminds you of your intimacy. And it doesn't have to be something big. So in our 12 questions, what's powerful there that we have not talked about is the architecture. It's a 5-act structure. And when you feel closest to me is in the first act. And this is about harking back to what makes your relationship unique. What is the bedrock of your love and your trust and your acknowledgement of one another? And when you feel closest to me, it speaks about the moments that come every day that unite you, that reaffirm your connection.
And this is really important because often when couples come to talk to each other, the topic is, what can we do better, or what's the problem? And that makes people defensive, whereas this is a sort of a creative, sort of appreciative question. When do you feel the closest to me? So our boundaries are down at this precise moment. We're open, aren't we?
Yeah, that I believe is the third question, right? So the first two are harking back to the beginning of the first impression or how have we changed. But yes, the intention of the Act 1, the first 3 questions is to remind you of your trust, remind you of your love, remind you of your connection, what's unique about the two of you have and hold, so that then we can step into Act 2, which is exploring the conflict.
And this next question, I think, is a very good example of how you do a sort of a bit of a negative and a positive at the same time. So what's the biggest challenge in our relationship right now? And what do you think it's trying to teach us?
Can I pause you for a sec? Because I want to hark back to, you asked the question in this earlier example where it says, why do we fight so much? Or what's our conflict? Right? When we spoke about it. And I think that harks back to the 5th aspect of a question that we haven't got to, because there are 5 qualities to a powerful question. And I want to use that as an example of the 5th, which is, to me, if you're going to get anything from the podcast, it's this. I said that the questions shape the answer. That question, why do we fight so much? What are the challenges in our relationship? Okay. Your mind is going to serve the question. So it will find the answers. Why do we fight so much? You will get a list of reasons why you fight so much. How helpful is that? How empowering is that? How much agency does that give you? How do those answers serve you? So in this question here, what is our biggest challenge right now? Okay, let's choose one. And what is it teaching us? That makes this an empowering question, because the answers that come will give you agency, will give you availability to make a change that's for the better. And often in life, we are so focused on answers that we're not focused on the question. And if you make a question and you shape it such that the answers can be empowering and give you agency, that can change the way you react to life and you engage with life. So in this case, what is our biggest challenge and what is it teaching us? If we just start with what's our biggest challenge, well, we can come up with 1, 2, 3, but making what is it teaching us gives us that route so that the answers are empowering and constructive and give us agency in improving our connection.
So here's another question that I think I might be tempted to get couples to answer in my therapy room. What sacrifice do you feel you've made that I've not acknowledged, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, we can break down this construction of this question because there's a number of parts that make it a safe yet uncomfortable question to answer. So the first part is, do you feel? What is the sacrifice you feel you've made? It could be, what is the sacrifice you've made? And here's the thing. Simply, when we ask questions, there's a lot of power in the questions. If I ask you, what is the sacrifice you've made? Then I'm asking you to be the arbiter of truth of what sacrifice you've made. By me being explicit, that is saying, what do you feel you've made? There's less of an argument here. That's your experience. So that is one thing that makes it such that You're speaking about the truth of your experiences, your opinion, and there's not a conflict there. There's not a reason to disagree. I can't disagree with your experience. So that's one. And then one is I haven't acknowledged. And why do you think that is? Puts one person in the other person's shoes. So they can say why they feel their sacrifice has not been acknowledged, but then they have to put themselves in the other person's shoes to see from their perspective why that hasn't been done. And that creates a sense of empathy. So you could actually go in and be quite harsh, but then you have to also kind of step back and give a reason why you think that is. So you're both acknowledging, because acknowledging a sacrifice you made can be quite challenging. The difference between a sacrifice that's not acknowledged, that can breed resentment, and one that is simply acknowledged, that is then offered as a gift. So the sacrifice that's unacknowledged can be one that breeds resentment, and the sacrifice that is acknowledged is offered as a gift. And us talking about that, albeit can be painful, is really helpful in opening and exhuming kind of the unacknowledged or the points of conflict that have not been fully resolved.
Another question I really like is, what is the pain in me you wish you could heal, and why?
That one is very deep, and that always creates a great sense of connection, and you could feel it. Maybe you can't heal the pain in the other, but undoubtedly you feel it and you see it in the people that are closest with you. And that one always brings the hearts out and the vulnerability out in the conversations that we've seen on the end.
I'm sitting here thinking about that question myself. I can see why this is the last question, because I think it'd be very difficult to go any deeper than this.
Well, no, that's actually the seventh question. There's still another.
The seventh question? You mean there's more?
There's more. Yeah, that's the seventh. That's the peak. That's the peak. I mean, the one right after that is, what's one experience you wish we never had, and why? So the seventh is an individual pain. And then the eighth is a collective one. And oftentimes there might be a connection between the two or not. But those are the peak questions in this conversation. And then question 9 and 10 takes us into acknowledgement of what we're learning from one another. Because regardless of the discomfort you may feel, this person you're speaking to is present in your conversation. They are there, and you are learning something from their presence. And they are learning something from yours, from your reflection of one another. There's a great deal of learning in that conversation. And so let's acknowledge that. And let's also talk about, number 10 is the future. What's one experience we really want, you can't wait for us to share, and why? Where are we going? So Act 1, we're talking about the past. And here in Act 4, just question 9 and 10, we're actually talking about the future. What is compelling us and propelling us into the future together? And then numbers 11 and 12, which is ultimately landing the plane and resolving it so that we land and integrate together, are acknowledging the fact that we're not going to be here forever. Number 11 is, if this was our last conversation, what would you never want me to forget? Let's have that now, because we actually don't know if we'll ever have a final conversation, because God knows how things end, the temporal nature of the existence of living. And then finally, in number 12 is, why do you love me? Which I don't think we ask often enough, quite frankly.
Well, we've got some very different questions coming up in a moment that come from a listener who's written in, and that's happening after this.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material and other benefits.
Guess how long I've been helping couples have more fulfilling relationships? The answer shocked me. 39 years. Over this time, I've developed all sorts of interventions to help couples communicate better and make meaningful changes to protect and nurture their love. Some ideas I've used for a while and dropped, but at the core, there are a handful of must-haves that I use with all the couples I see face to face. Sadly, I can't work with everyone who wants my help, but I can share my best relationship tools. I've put them in a new course with worksheets and links to my most helpful podcasts. There are 4 hours of instructions to do at your pace together, with your partner or on your own. And it normally retails at £150. But to launch, I've dropped them to a special introductory price of £99.50. If you'd like to find out more, go to andrewgmarshall.com/tools and get started on improving your relationship.
New Yorkers and visitors alike are heading to New York City's extraordinary experience that you have to feel to believe. Summit One Vanderbilt, an interactive multi-level experience of art, sky, and exploration. Discover exhilarating heights, explore reflective spaces, walk among floating silver orbs, and immerse yourself in spectacular views of New York. Book your visit at summitov.com and start your journey here.
So if you'd like to participate in the programme or you'd like to sign up and join in the conversation with my Substack newsletter, go to the same place, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, and you'll find out how to sign up and how to send in a letter. My wife and I have been together over 13 years and have just celebrated our 9th wedding anniversary. 5 years ago, my wife opened up a business. Our first child was born 3 years ago and our second 18 months ago. My wife is strong-willed with a wonderful, outgoing, positive personality, and these traits are really needed to run a successful business. However, her business struggled for the first few years. I admit that back then I had a hot-cold relationship with her business, as I knew that it made her happy, yet it was taking so much of her time for very little pay. At the same time, she was dealing with a very young child and a husband who wasn't coping too well at becoming a father and finding himself down the pecking order after the children and the business. On the surface, our relationship was still good and still is. We love each other and love spending time with each other. We moved to a bigger place before child 2 came along, and once there really struggled financially. My wife's business still isn't paying her much, and we have to run up quite a bit of debt. It was at this point we should have had some hard talks about us and how to work better together, but we weren't really working as a team, more separately, albeit for a common goal. And here we have a question at the end. How do I tell her how I feel without her exploding and her business becoming a wall between us?
Yeah, great question. So first thing that comes up for me is just the acknowledgement that the first baby they have is not their first baby. The first baby is her business for her. You know, anyone who's with a person who has a startup knows how much that startup needs love and attention. So no wonder the question is, how can I have that conversation with her without her exploding it? Because albeit they have 2 physical baby children, there's also another baby called the startup, which is important to her. And so I totally understand the concern about how do you create the space to have this conversation. And again, it's first we have to create the space. If I were to deactivate a bomb, I'm not going to do it quickly. I'm going to move slowly. I'm going to first create the space around it so that there's no distractions. There's no yelling children running at me because I'm going to unplug a bomb, right? I mean, his question, or this person's question, is how do I have a conversation, a difficult conversation or challenging conversation without exploding? And here's the challenge too, is that when we step into discomfort, our natural instinct is to move fast because we want to get out of discomfort.
Well, if there's a bomb, you want to get out of there pretty quickly, don't you?
Yeah, but if you move fast, it might explode.
Yeah.
So when you're in a conversation where you feel uncomfortable, you have to react opposite to your instincts, which is fight or flight. Instead, you have to take a deep breath and slow down. Don't speed up. Because it's where we speed up that more confusions come, i.e. misunderstanding of definitions, for instance. You said this, I said that. Maybe we're talking about the same word, but they mean different things to us. So I have to slow down, play back. When you say this, what I hear is this. Is that what you're saying? Yes, it is, or no, it's not. And that's a tool that we use called creative listening. And I can talk about that. We can double click on that if you like. But to answer this question, first, let's create the space. And the space means we need to create a space where we have time to move slowly. And we're conscientious of that. We articulate an intention to explore a conversation without an agenda.
Because it feels like there is an agenda here at the moment. I think that's one of the...
Well, so here's the thing. Is his agenda to get her to give up her business or to give less attention to the business? Or is his intention to create the space to have a conversation so that they can get on the same page?
Well, I think it's the first, but we wanted to make it the second.
Right. So he has to give up on the second and just articulate the first, which is the curiosity. Tap into his curiosity. He has a loving partner. We're working independently, albeit for a common goal, he states. So tap into your curiosity. How is it that we've been together 13 years? We love each other. We enjoy spending time with each other, but there's certain things we can't talk about. That's a fair intention. It's not saying there's not certain things we can talk about, and I want to, have you change your priorities.
And I think that we need to have his things that are taking him away from the family and the relationship as well. Because at the moment, we're only hearing about her business. We're not actually hearing how does his job impact on all of this.
Yeah, and I think for oftentimes many husbands, when that first child, second child come in, you do become third, fourth priority. And it's very challenging for many men to have that because initially before, you're number one priority. And in this case, the business came first, which this person did not have a biological connection to, nor did it have a financial support because it wasn't making quite a bit. So obviously his connection to it was less so than his partner's. But then obviously when his children come in, even though they take priority, he does have a biological connection to them. So it's not as challenging. But clearly many of us, I speak for myself, realize my joke to my wife is I'm just the obstacle for my children to your breasts for milk. I'm just in the way. And that's true for a certain phase in life. And I assume that will change in time as they get older. But I think acknowledging that that's challenging. And when you can create the space, because God knows they're busy with 2 young children and a startup business, if you will. I say startup because it's not financially stable and making, financial returns as they would like, regardless of how many years they've been at it. So that is a lot of energy that's required in other forms. And so to create the space so that we can calmly have a conversation that may be uncomfortable, but in a safe space is imperative. And so articulating that with intention, not of, I want this to be the result, but tapping into curiosity, saying, where am I coming from and where are we beginning? That is articulation of space. And then you bring into that quality, well-constructed questions. So frankly, I would ask these 12 questions. If at the very least, at the end of the book, I present for each question or for each act, other questions that you could replace. Because it's not as important like which specific question, they have to be well-constructed, but it's also about the architecture. So do not begin this conversation. Once you create the space, say, hey, my love, I have a book, or I would like to have a series of questions that we can explore this because, I have a curiosity of how we can improve our relationship. I don't know what the answers are, but I would really appreciate the time for us to take the time to have this conversation. And begin with questions that hark back to your connection, that what brought you together. What are the unique experiences that you created together? What are the unique values that you share together? Where is it that you began?
What are the things that we used to do when we first met that we've stopped doing that we might like to start doing again?
Sure. That harks back to what brought you together, that you've lost, that you want to bring back. The beginning is building the architecture of trust and acknowledgement and respect. And that creates a sense of safety. And that opens up slowly the heart and brings down the defenses of the mind. Then we slowly, in Act 2, start exploring conflict. And in Act 3, which in our case is questions 7 and 8, the peak question, the really vulnerable. And then you go to Act 4, which is starting to land the plane, acknowledgement, what are we learning from this? And 5 is profound, resolving the whole, not maybe the issue, but this conversation. Let's remind ourselves, we're on this journey. What is it that we love about each other? What is it that you're getting from the relationship that you get from nowhere else? What are you most grateful for in our connection? You can go through that structure and have a journey of exploration. Now, if we double click on the construction of the question, what might be really helpful here is he could ask questions that put her in his shoes and vice versa. So an example of that could be, what do you think is the hardest thing being your husband? So that puts her in his shoes looking at her. What do you think I misunderstand about you? And why do you think that is?
And one sort of final piece of advice I would give you is to be aware that this is just the beginning of a conversation. This is not a one-time conversation. You're going to be going back over this. The whole subject of how do you balance family and business is a sort of ongoing conversation that you're going to be having for the rest of your life. So if you are thinking you're going to knock this off in, 10 minutes, that's the time when you're really going to let off the bomb.
Following up on that, I was reminded that I absolutely agree. This is not the end-all, be-all conversation. What this is a practice. Because love is not just an emotion. In my opinion, love is also a practice. And creating the space. And that's what's beautiful about love, is that we're also changing and learning and growing. And here's a person who's the most intimate that you're sharing these experiences with. Let's create a practice of communication that explores and harks back on these beautiful changes and challenges that we're facing and overcoming together.
So thank you, Topaz, for being a witness on The Meaningful Life today. We've almost finished the main podcast, so I'm going to finish off by asking you what makes your life meaningful.
2, 3 things. One is my children. For me and my personality and my being, there's nothing more valuable to me than seeing my children learn something new, experience something new, see them grow. It's the greatest thing in my life. Another one is the power of the work that my team and I do, the responses that we get, the vulnerability of the participants who come in and have the courage to share a bit of themselves on our AND videos, and the notes that we get about the quality of how our questions have been helpful in people's lives. That's incredibly, incredibly reassuring and life-affirming that my time and energy and my contribution here and my team's contribution is of use and utility for people.
It's interesting you talk about being vulnerable, because what we're going to be talking about in the bonus material is how to be more vulnerable, because you can't answer these questions without being vulnerable. And if you want to hear the bonus material, you can subscribe directly via Apple or Spotify. If you want to become a supporter of The Meaningful Life and unlock the bonus material this way, here are the details.
You've been listening to The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. You can follow Andrew on Twitter, like him on Facebook, and please leave a review wherever you consume your podcasts. Making, editing, and distributing The Meaningful Life comes with substantial costs, and we'd like to ask for your help. Visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material for every program, send in a letter to be discussed by Andrew and his guests, and join a community of other people seeking to make their life meaningful. At the gold level, you get even more benefits. Production of The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall is by Michael Dooney. Social media by Madeleine Healy. Sound engineering and theme tune by Sebastian de la Luz Mendoza. And I'm Susie Colick. Please tell your friends and spread the word. Thank you.
Five Below means hot stuff, cool prices, and the best kind of fun anywhere. The trends you see all over your feed can be yours for way less than the rest. Like can't keep in stock candy and snacks, brand name beauty, the latest tech, room decor, and lots more. Plus, get extreme value finds you just have to see to believe in our 5 Beyond shop. Yep, you could say we're kind of a big deal here. Shop over 1,600 stores nationwide and 5below.com.